Widakuswara. She's in Washington. Hi, Patsy. So let me just draw your attention to a tweet by President Donald Trump earlier today. He says, get tough Democrat mayors and governors. These people are anarchists. Call in our National Guard now. The world is watching and laughing at you and Sleepy Joe. Is this what America wants? No. Can you just explain to us what his objective is here politically or even socially?
Well, we've been waiting all day long to see what President Trump will do in reaction to all these protests, particularly now that it's gone on for the sixth consecutive night since Monday when the killing of George Floyd happened. But today, as we can see, his response has been through these tweets where he is blaming everybody else, including the Democratic mayors and governors who he considers to be weak in responding to these looting and also rioting that has happened in some of the protests, despite the fact that the majority of the protesters are doing it safely and peacefully. And the other thing is that he's, instead of trying to unite the nation and calming the nation in a time of crisis, he really is trying to cause more division, or at least his critics say that he is trying to sow more division, and essentially pouring fuel to the fire. And instead of calming the situation down, trying to get people more agitated in some way. What is the purpose of the political calculation that's behind this is we don't know. I mean, we know that there's an election in 5 months, and this is perhaps his way to rally his base. The president has been known to just really focus on his core supporters, about 40, perhaps 30% of the population who are his base, rather than try to bring to build a more broad coalition of supporters. And this is another example of where he is trying to do that. The other reason is perhaps he's trying to deflect attention from the ongoing pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic that has taken the lives of over 100,000 Americans so far. So perhaps this is another deflection, or at least those are some of the criticisms that's coming to the president. So the fact that he is blaming the Democrats, the fact that he's blaming the media, the fact that he's blaming radical left organizations or groups or movements such as the Antifa, perhaps shows that his intention is to not take responsibility, but focus the blame elsewhere.
That point you've made on his deflection over the U.S.'s performance in fighting the pandemic is quite interesting. Of course, everyone's still talking about his recent quote, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And just so our viewers can know this is a repeat of something that was said in 1967 by Walter Headley, who was the then police chief of Miami, believe it is. He was known for cracking down on protests, especially on communities of color specifically. What do you think is the fallout from his comments as we approach the election period?
Well, certainly this is the kind of language that the president is using that his critics point out to as, the term called dog whistling, or is signaling these words that have racist undertones, the words that have racial and historic references. For example, when he said vicious dogs in one of his tweets, referring to protesters if they would ever get into the White House. Of course, this refers back to what happened in the 1960s during the civil rights protests, when dogs were unleashed on the African Americans who were protesting. So these kinds of racially charged words does not help in terms of bringing the country together. It does stoke and flame the fires of division in this country. And many of his, not just his critics, his allies are also asking him to please tone down the language. And in fact, some of his advisors has been trying to push him to make some kind of statement today from the White House in order to calm the nation. But as we can see, there's nothing on his public schedule today. We don't know what his schedule will be like tomorrow because the White House has not released it. And all that we have heard from him are his incendiary tweets.
Patsy, does President Trump care about people of color?
He claims to care a lot about people of color. I mean, that's one of the things that he likes to say a lot, is that under Donald Trump, the African-American unemployment numbers is the lowest it's ever been. Minority unemployment, including Asian-American and Latinos, lowest it's ever been. So he says these things. And in fact, his administration has tried to do several events in trying to outreach and garner support of the African-American votes, as well as other minorities. But so far, it is still struggling in terms of the image that it's projecting when the president does use these kinds of racial undertones and these kinds of inflammatory words.
What is your take, Patsy, on President Trump's promise to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization? Of course, it's considered a communist organization by many people. Obviously, this is another political move, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, no one can really define what Antifa is. It's not an organization with leadership or a structure or membership that you can go to or a headquarters. So when you're trying to designate an organization as a terrorist organization, first of all, you must be able to define what it is, because right now, as it stands, Antifa is a movement of people with certain kind of ideologies, people who are anti the far-right groups, anti-white supremacists, anti-racist. And these are the people who perhaps use certain kinds of tactics that are considered more aggressive, such as vandalism, in their protest. And so when you designate this group that is undefinable as a terrorist organization, the other thing that you have to consider is that the U.S. does not have domestic anti-terrorism laws. It does have a mechanism to designate foreign entities as a foreign terrorist organization. And in that way, the State Department or the Treasury can make life difficult for them. But it doesn't really have any mechanism to do that as a domestic group, as well as there are issues of First Amendment that does protect freedom of speech for all Americans, whatever ideology they may be.
Patsy Widakuswara, we appreciate you coming on TR2 to give us your perspective. Thank you.